He should be lit. Why are they all their mics off? Those mics are on now. Fly swatter. So you should get the. Okay, I'd like to good morning, everyone, and welcome to our oversight hearing. I'm Mr. Jim Bell, Chairman of the Human Services Committee. We welcome you to Sacramento and the state capitol for this hearing on Out of Our Mouths, Stories of Hunger in California. We have a 2-hour hearing today that's full of testimony from Californians who have experienced hunger. And first, I want to take a moment for thanking all the witnesses who will appear. And we appreciate taking the time from your lives to come to Sacramento and share your story. I know for many of you this is a big sacrifice, and myself and my fellow members appreciate this as we learn from your stories. And we've read newspaper articles and we have statistics here, but there's never a better source of data than real people coming to us who are sharing their experiences. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. Mike, and we don't want to have a lot of applause today. So we're just gonna, we want to keep on schedule because we will get kicked out of here eventually. So my conviction is that food is a human rights issue developed a long time ago. And I developed this belief a long time ago when I worked in the fields, paying my way through high school and college, picking and hoeing vegetables and flowers, paying my way through school. And decades later, as a local government official, working on these issues, I think that conviction has only grown. And as you know, it's always struck me that, especially in California, where we provide the rest of the nation and other countries much of their food, that we have so much hunger here in California. How can that be? That's the question it's a fundamental question we need to ask ourselves. And it's a moral obligation to provide for the neediest in society with the basics, and what's more basic than feeding people? It's a well-known fact that here, despite our abundance of food and programs to provide food for the hungry, that we have unbelievably only half the eligible participation in the food assistance program. And having only half is one of the worst records in the United States. Today you'll hear from some people about some of the reasons why so many people are needlessly going hungry. And I'd like to drive a few more points to you. You know that hunger is not only a basic right, but it has so many negative effects on families and their health and even our economy here. And you know we need a lot of help with our economy, right? So we need to look at this from the economic standpoint. This country has an obesity crisis on its hands, and families are already unemployed and stressed out, and we lose most important economic activity when people cannot get food. And we actually forego billions of dollars that could come to California in economic activity when these federal benefits remain in Washington. And you know they're 100% funded with federal funds. So I think that's a pretty good deal for California if we can get the 100% federally funded programs back to California for directly benefiting the neediest people in our state. The health effects of not feeding people play into expensive conditions like obesity, diabetes, and stress and heart conditions. And this strains the health care system and costs us all in the long run. So I would ask you to please keep your testimony on these individual effects as we hear your testimony. For those of you viewing you on TV or right here in the hearing room, your testimony firsthand will almost a dozen Californians who are struggling from not having basic food assistance. We're going to hear from some people some pretty dramatic stories. And many of them will be testifying about their personal difficulty they encounter when applying for food. Children will testify how they watch their parents struggle to put food on the table, and parents testifying how stressful it is to not be unable to provide food for their children. And we'll hear from farm workers from places like Fresno County who will talk about picking fruit, but ironically lining up at the food bank to get her own food. That's I think a real strange dichotomy that we have so much food, but then people have to line up to get the food at the food bank. Other speakers will tell us of their experience of being in the military and having limited income, but making too much to qualify for a food assistance program. As well, we have a witness who will talk about supplemental security income working as a senior and still cannot afford to have enough funds for food. And at the end of the personal testimonies, we'll hear about the possible solutions, because we're going to hear some heart-rending stories, but we got to come up with some action and some answers. And that's what my job ultimately is. And we have to prevent some of the difficulties that our witnesses have endured. So I will be looking forward to hearing what the presenters will outline for policymakers in this building. And I'd also like to point out that we have a background paper which we are listing several recent reports that go into detail about our food assistance program and how it could be simplified to better meet the needs of applicants and recipients. And as I said before, listening to testimony and other witnesses, please make your comments, and we'll hear now from our first witness, and that is Mark Lowry, Director, Community Partnership of Orange County. Welcome, Mark, and you're our leadoff witness to talk about the background on California hunger and its history and mission. So please proceed.
Certainly. And thank you. I was asked to give a little brief historic perspective about the group that helped organize the event today. First, the California Hunger Action Coalition was established about 20 years ago by a small group of emergency food providers who came to the conclusion that we were not going to be able to feed vulnerable Californians simply by handing out bags of groceries at local charities. From its inception, the California Hunger Action Coalition, also known as CHAC, pitched a large tent and engaged a broad base of partners to meet the needs of food-insecure Californians. In CHAC's formative years, the group built an intentionally diverse steering committee. The group was ethnically diverse, geographically diverse, and was comprised of representatives of both public and private nutrition programs. CHAC's members are united in their belief that access to nutritious and safe food is a fundamental human right. The coalition advocates for freedom from hunger for all Californians. And we also believe that government action is an important part of this effort to end hunger in California. Over the years, CHAC's actions to support that mission have evolved and changed. In its early years, CHAC focused on a statewide annual conference that was often held either at a Sillimer Conference Center in Pacific Grove or right here at the Clarion Hotel in Sacramento. For a number of years, CHAC also published Hunger Action News, which was a regular source of information for advocates to be informed and engaged. Today, those involved in CHAC include food banks and food pantries, faith-based and secular organizations, operators of the WIC program, providers of school meals, nutritionists, advocates, low-income consumers, and others. And our organization, CHAC, was also instrumental in helping the evolution of the now very successful California Association of Food Banks. For many years, CHAC has most emphasized building the capacity of low-income consumers to be effective advocates. Those skills were developed by the aid of professional facilitators who traveled the state and helped train low-income consumers about how to be effective advocates. CHAC's signature event became its annual Hunger Action Day in Sacramento. Each year, as is the case today, hundreds of advocates, primarily low-income consumers, travel to the state capitol for a one-day themed event. That day typically begins with a review of CHAC's legislative agenda. And that legislative agenda usually includes recommended improvements to state-administered nutrition programs like food stamps and school-based nutrition programs. The day also includes training on how to be an effective advocate, Hunger Fighter Awards for those that have been champions in the nutrition field, and visits with our legislators. It was just yesterday, though, that I was reminded as a side note that this event, Hunger Action Day, has also provided an opportunity for like-minded people to meet. And in summertime in Sacramento, as it turns out, love has bloomed. And Hunger Action Day has actually been attributed for several successful marriages. So,
that's a well-deserved accomplishment.
Yeah, that was another thing for us to celebrate. Each child, each person grows and maintains good health based largely on the quantity and quality of their nutritional intake. Proper nutrition promotes the well-being of people and the communities in which they live. Providing a consistent supply of nutritious, affordable, safe, and accessible food is the responsibility of all of us, each person, the public, and the private sector. CHAC representatives are here today to tell their personal stories and to encourage their elected officials to be active partners in promoting health and wellness in the communities in which they live. We appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now we're going to hear some more about why we're having a hearing. We got two witnesses, Lee Holquist, and Lee is the program manager at Monterey County Food Bank. And then Frank Tamburello is the director of Hunger Action in Los Angeles. So Lee, you're first, so welcome. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Sacramento.
Thank you so much. And Frank and I are co-chairs of this year's event. We want to thank you and the members present, your staff, particularly Francis, who helped us so much in putting this together. So we're very grateful to you. I am the programs manager for a food bank, a smaller food bank in Monterey County. And this is why we're having the hearing, is that about 2 years ago, we're very good at delivering food to people in need. About 2 years ago, we started running out of food. And for the first time in our 20-year history, our food bank ran out of rice. And the numbers just spiked. And we went to the community, of course, and they responded very strongly. We're so fortunate that we have food to give. But the numbers have not gone down. And it's a new world. 2 years later, we're serving 50% more than our traditional numbers, and we don't expect it to decline. So the timing of this hearing is fortunate, unfortunately, and we are looking at drastic cuts to our social programs that are going to impact our food banks and our ability to feed people. We appreciate your time. As the tradition of CHAC, we've brought people from all over the state with many different backgrounds, and we appreciate your giving them this time to voice their experience.
So SSI, and right now in the state of California, people in SSI do not get food assistance programs. So we're actually in the budget having discussions about that to see what kind of changes we can make. And next we'll hear from people. See, Stephen. Are you Stephen?
Yes, I am.
Stephen Jones from Monterey County on seniors and working and facing hunger. And welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you
Appreciate you being here.
for providing the opportunity to speak to these issues. I'm 61 years old. I'm a longtime cabinet and furniture maker by trade. In 2004, in another state, at a time when I had recently begun a new job and consequently was in between health care coverage provided by employers, I had a massive heart attack. Extremely fortunate to have reached the phone to call 911 before I expired, and luckier still that I lived close enough to a fire rescue station that they reached me in time to resuscitate me. I spent the next several months in a hospital and a rehab facility. 10 months later, and with medical bills in excess of $1 million, I was approved to receive SSI benefits and Medicaid. Now, that all transpired in another state. Subsequent to that, I returned to California because the heat, the climate in the state I was living at, was Florida. It was so bad for my health that it just flattened me. I couldn't deal with the heat, and I couldn't afford to run an air conditioner in the little apartment that I was sharing with another disabled guy who was a former neighbor of mine who got thrown out of his place. I was in California about 6 months, staying at the invitation of friends, and I got on all the waiting lists for affordable housing here in the state, and all those waiting lists are still pending. I'm a year and a half out, and of course there's not really a lot of housing compared to the need. But I finally found kind of a rough barn, partially converted barn, on what used to be a small chicken farm a long, long time ago. And I can barely afford that, but I'm able to pay my rent there without subsidy, you know, beyond my SSI. And that's where I live now, and I've made it actually quite comfortable. Now, on the question of food, well, it's true that many people don't eat particularly nutritious food anyway, even when they can afford to do so. Simply having enough to eat is always a challenge when a restricted budget such as that afforded by SSI and the state portion of the SSI benefits is what's available to pay for it. I'm not complaining about the benefit. I'm very grateful. But, you know, one needs to be really creative. Now, since my own disabling heart attack, I've come to know many other people, elderly and disabled people, like me, far worse off than I am. I mean, I consider myself fortunate in that I'm fairly resourceful. I have my wits about me. I'm kind of low on stamina. I don't have a lot of strength. I get winded very easily. You know, I'll probably have to sleep for 24 hours when I get home after this trip up here, you know. But I have a bed to sleep in, and I'm enormously happy about that. So there's a lot of people out there who are not that different from me, not necessarily in the particulars, but in the overall perspective of being you know, somewhat older, severely challenged health-wise, have maybe worked all their lives at various jobs, maybe never had enough to, you know, create a nest egg or have whatever they need to sustain themselves in stressful and disadvantaged, you know, situations like this. In my own case, you know, my rent, electric bill, and the phone bill, and the little bit of gas that I can put in the car every month, and my car insurance, because I live semi-rural and I need to be able to get back and forth to my doctor's appointments, which I have several ongoing all the time. That leaves me about $200 a month average for food and all the little things that one needs, soap, toothpaste, etc. You know, the occasional thrift shop clothes, like this marvelous shirt that I got a month ago for $3. But, you know, it doesn't leave, there's no room for error and still to be able to eat. So it's really, really pretty tight. Now, my situation, which also is like, you know, other people, the medication that I take for my heart problems and associated problems with that, you know, has been shown to increase the risk for diabetes. And in fact, now I'm diabetic, but low level, but I'm diabetic. But what happens is that one needs to maintain a fairly decent diet in order to be the most efficient way to keep the diabetes from worsening at an accelerated rate. That's hard enough to just eat a regular diet, even with the occasional junk food, which I don't really do anymore. But it's much harder when you have a restricted diet that you got to stick to, and you got to really pay attention to nutrition. So affordability-wise, it's a lot trickier. I'm doing okay with that so far, but now because of other budget cuts and because of my own dental problems, I'm somewhat challenged in the dental department. And with the recent cancellation of the adult dental program for Medi-Cal people, and I needed dentures, my application for that got in like a day or two before the program was canceled, but I was denied anyway. That makes it harder for me to actually chew the kind of fresh vegetables that I would need to eat in order to mitigate the gradual increasing in severity of the diabetes, which ultimately makes it more expensive, ultimately, for the state and the federal government, for me being a needy person. And that's just an unfortunate byproduct of, programs that ought to be able to work in tandem maybe. They don't always work to the best interest of people who are in need. And I understand there's budget requirements with all of that, and it's a tricky situation no matter which way you go at it. But it is unfortunate, that things go that way. I'm enormously grateful for the help that I get in my situation, and there's no question about that. I think the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, it's not an idea that's universally appreciated, but it still is more than a platitude. I think from a pragmatic point of view, that if a large and steadily increasingly large segment of the population is disenfranchised further by not being able to get enough to eat and maybe failures in the medical system, that ultimately it affects not just those of us in that position, but it brings down everybody else eventually as well because of the drain on the economy and how it inhibits the economy and the state and the country to rebound from the recent economic troubles that are affecting everybody. So.
Well, we would really appreciate your testimony, especially Stephen, the connection between your health problems and nutrition, the fact that it's directly related to that. There's a direct correlation.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me speak.
And I think under this segment,